In this video, we are going to be installing StanceCo's angle kit. This thing is super beefy. I'm gonna run you through this here in a second on the first gen CTS-V. I've got the complete instructions and I'm gonna run you through everything step by step. We're gonna basically imagine you just unbox this. I'm gonna show you what you get with the kit, what extra add-ons you can add if you want to, and then I'll show you the disassembly. I'll show you some specialty tools that you may need to do this job. And we're gonna go get it installed and get it aligned and test it out. First things first, when you buy this kit, what do you get? Well, you get a ton of stickers. I don't know if this is special for me or what, but I got all kinds of goodies with it. I got koozies. I think my wife already took the koozies. I don't know where they went. Super detailed instructions with pictures, which I love. There's also videos online. So if you look up StanceCo on YouTube, they also show you how they develop this kit, which I found to be super helpful in addition to these instructions. And I'm gonna walk you through all of the steps. I've actually already started the disassembly, which again, I'm not gonna skip over that. I will show you the disassembly on the car and how I got there. But let's dive into the kit, what it comes with, and what are some extra add-ons that you might wanna think about including. One of the things you get is adjustable sway bar end links. Here are the stock sway bar end links for reference. And in addition to being adjustable and, Heim joint ends, the other nice thing is if you look at these stockers, you see that they're fixed. One point's one way, one point's the other way. And that actually becomes a point of where you can actually make contact and limit steering angles. I think that's one of the big reasons why they include this, but this also allows you to dial in your sway bar, which is super cool, and you can do that on the car. So that's one thing the kit comes with. Another thing the kit comes with that I like on my Mustang drift car, for example, I don't have. I actually removed these, but it would be better to keep them. So you can install these to limit at full lock how much the rack moves side to side. And it actually makes it so that this is what makes contact and stops the rack versus you just slamming it side to side. So this saves parts. These are super cool. They give you, I think, 5 per side, and depending on what wheels you have and offsets and spacers, you can dial in the amount of angle you want before you get rubbing. So that's super cool. Someone who has installed angle kits before, I'm gonna tell you some things that I like right off the bat. First of all, this completely replaces your lower ball joints, which I threw in the trash, but with a spherical joint. So you've got a spherical joint. This gets pressed into your lower control arm. What I like is it's a mixture of aluminum parts with steel parts where you want them. This tapered fit right here, this shank, I know you guys might not think it's a huge deal. The fact that this has a castle nut and a cotter pin is awesome because I've done this before, and these type of things want to back themselves loose. You're gonna get to torque this to spec and then throw a cotter pin in there and never have to worry about that. That is super cool. They've also included spacers on both sides so that when you install this joint can actually articulate. So that's pretty cool. You get a new outer tie rod. Again, Heim joints here, all this hardware. The metric looks like it is grade 10.9. So that's great. You get this nice, sweet billet aluminum outer tie rod that's adjustable. I like that. Overall, this kit is it's pretty sweet. Oh, the other thing too, there's adjustable Ackerman. So you've got Ackerman adjustments, 2 different settings, don't want to lose that. They recommend just installing it as it comes, but you can adjust this right here. So we'll dive into that when we get to that part. Everything is really well thought out, and this is all bolt-on, no cutting. The only little add-on that I opted for were these longer front brake lines because, again, your stock brake lines at full lock could potentially get strained. So not very expensive to add this onto the kit. You know what? And again, these are of much better construction than your stock brake lines anyway, so you might even get better brake feel with these. The only other thing that is not shown on the table, but StanceCo recommends, and they kind of call it out here at the very end of the instructions, are these Moog EV426 inner tie rods. So I found these on Amazon for like $18 a piece, so I just went ahead and ordered them. I'm gonna be throwing those on too, and when we get to that part in the instructions, we'll talk about that, and then I won't have to cut these when I go ahead and install them. So let's dive into the disassembly. First things first, jack the car up, put it on some sturdy jack stands, and then go ahead and remove both the driver and passenger side wheels. The first things we're gonna do is we're gonna break apart our outer tie rod. So we're gonna pop out this little pin, 18 millimeter impact and then just take a hammer, smack this down and pop this out of place. Once you've given that a smack, take the castle nut off, drops out through the bottom. Throw your nut on so you don't lose it. And now we can move this around any which way we want to get better access to the brake caliper. Okay, we've got our 2 caliper nuts. They're also 18 millimeters. Okay. Before I pop this all the way off, I may take these pins out and pull the brake pads out just to get those out of place. You can leave them, but I think I'm gonna do that now actually before I take those all the way out. Those out and all your hardware is stored, you can finish undoing those 2 bolts and then this will pop out. I'm gonna grab myself a way to hang this because you don't want the caliper to hang by the caliper itself, put all that weight and strain on the brake line, even though we're replacing it. If you want to, this is a 10 millimeter, you can break this loose now, but just don't loosen it too much because you will lose brake fluid. But if you think it's gonna be super tight or corroded, while everything is still attached, you can just grab your ratchet and knock that loose. Your caliper hung out of the way, go ahead and grab your big monster CTS-V rotor, pull that off, smile. Next, undo the 2 nuts holding the sway bar end link in place. Sometimes an impact won't work here and you actually need to use an Allen wrench to hold the stud from spinning, and then you can take the nut off and then the entire end link can come out of the vehicle. I highly recommend using impact if you have one. Now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the lower ball joint, which requires you to loosen that nut, and then similar to a tie rod end, you smack it out of place. And then once that drops down, you can take the entire spindle and remove it from the lower control arm and kind of set it aside. And then we got to switch over to a specialty tool, which I'll talk about here in a second, but luckily you can rent them locally. Go to your local parts store and rent this tool in front of you. This is from O'Reilly. You can use this both to remove the ball joint and also press in the new spherical sleeve, which is awesome. Okay, so we've got the tool set up to press out the ball joint from the lower control arm. You'll see me doing that right now. You definitely need a big ratchet here or a breaker bar to get some leverage because it's in there pretty tight. And you won't be able to get it fully out, at least on a CTS-V, because the tool bottoms out. So you get it most of the way out, and then you take a mini sledge or a big hammer and just tap it out the rest of the way. I've got everything removed, but if you have any questions, just hit me up in the comments and I can help explain all of this. The first side took me a little bit longer, and that was only because I didn't know how to set up the ball joint press that I rented from O'Reilly. Once I figured it out, I made a bet with my wife that I could remove the passenger side from wheel on the car to completely like you see it back there in 30 minutes, and I did it in 28. So this stuff comes apart easy, and now we're ready for the install. The first thing we're gonna do with the install is we're gonna jump to the part in the instructions that talks about this guy right here. So we've got everything pretty much set up. The only thing I want to be really careful of here is that we don't press this in cocked at all, because the original one is steel. This is aluminum on aluminum, so you could damage it. So I think everything is good, but take your time. If it starts to feel like it's binding up, stop, and I would readjust. Now we just removed these 2. And they just want you to slide this down in there like that. We are going to take our spacer and our nylock nut and slide those up on and just finger tight. I'm going to remove the castle nut. Now by hand you can go ahead and lift the spindle assembly and just set it on top of that shank. And once it's in place, take the castle nut and just push it down with one hand and then tighten that castle nut just finger tight. And that's kind of step 1 of getting the stock spindle attached to the angle block. Next, take the metric bolt nut and washer, and this is going to go through from the bottom. So the bolt head's going to be on the bottom. It goes through the angle block and then up through the spindle. Put the washer on top, put the nut on top, and this is the first thing that you actually tighten up, and that's going to suck the spindle down onto the angle block. 16 millimeter on the bottom and a 19 on top. This is a 27 millimeter. And let's go ahead and snug this up. If you're like me and you appreciate torque specs, I reached out to StanceCo and I got some answers for you. So this outside nut and bolt combo, the grade 10.9, this is gonna go to 85 foot-pounds. Your castle nut, tighten that to 70 to 75 foot-pounds. I start at 70 and then see where this is at, and then you always tighten a little bit more, never loosen, to put your cotter pin through. This big 27 millimeter down on the bottom right here, we're gonna go to 110 foot-pounds on that one. The other thing I'll point out too is this spacer, if you take this apart, you'll notice is angled to match the angle of the angle block. You don't want it to get spun because it can get spun and tightened and you'll see a big gap right there. So if you can see, but I actually went and marked mine with Sharpie so you can see that it's in the correct spot. Everything sits flat. Just make sure you've got that before you torque it. And I noticed that my spindle, once torque, was a little bit stiff, but I think that is just the Heim joint and it's gonna loosen up as time goes on. So here we've got the stock sway bar end link, and here we have the new one. Now, these are adjustable, and mine, when they came just a little bit too long, and when I tried to shorten them, I actually ran out of thread length on one of them, so I had to trim a little bit off of the inner part of the threads. You probably won't have to do that. These are just cut to length and sent to you, but if you do, you can just trim a little bit off, and if you wanna know this measurement, it's from center to center is roughly 4 5/8. So 4 5/8 of an inch from the center of this to the center of that. And notice I have both of mine with the bolt heads on the same side. So this matches that. Now I just gotta do the same thing to the other one. Once they're adjusted to length, go ahead and put the sway bar end links in place. I'm on the driver's side and we're looking towards the back of the car. So you'll see the head of the bolts facing towards the rear of the car. And as I flip the camera over here, you can see the washers are sandwiched on the back side, just like so. I torqued those to 30 foot-pounds, and then I went ahead in here and tightened the jam nuts down. But now you're done with the sway bar end links completely, and you're also done with your angle block. To get the rack limiters in, we've got to remove the boot. And this is a brand new steering rack, so yours might look a little bit more worn out than mine. But I'm gonna drive my little straight edge in there and try and separate that and make that a little wider, and then I'll clip this side right here, which looks kind of like a zip tie. And we will also have to remove our outer tie rod, which is getting replaced anyway, so we can slide the boot out. I'm just gonna do a voiceover anyway. I'm not gonna film and cover completely how to remove your inner tie rods. I will show you the difference between the inner tie rods and an EV426 from Moog, which is recommended. But the tip that I will give you is go ahead, if you're going to like O'Reilly, for example, and get part number 67178. You can rent this tool for like 90 bucks, then you get your money back. It's got a ton of different adjustment settings in here. And these are meant to slide over and basically grab the flats on the inner tie rod to allow you to break it loose. You need like a special tool like this. On a stock CTS-V, or at least mine, 1 inch and 15/16 is the size that you want. So pop your stockers off using a tool like that, and then you can go ahead and install these. If you're wondering where these spacers go, these spacers slide onto the inside of the rack, and this is kind of like your bump stop. So you can stack those as much as you need. But if you were curious, this is the EV426 on the left. It's way thicker than the stock. Now the only difference is it's also longer too. We're only gonna cut what we need. I think you cut roughly 1 inch off, but we won't do that until later. So I think what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and thread these in on both sides with no rack spacers, just hand tight, and then we'll try and get some measurements. You'll go ahead and cut an inch off right here using an angle grinder. Next thing they recommend to do is to go to your lower control arm. And if you look, it's slotted. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen these. We're gonna pull the lower control arm outwards on both sides to the maximum amount, and that should give you maximum camber. It should also help tow the car to allow you to get more adjustments. You don't run out of adjustment on these. Last step in this video is going to be to show you how to check for any kind of binding or issues that you need to limit how far it steers. So right now it is turned quote unquote to lock, but as we'll see in a second, lock is really just contact between the lower control arm, or better yet, probably the spindle, I'll show you in a second, and the adapters. We actually have to limit how far this thing will turn. So let's crawl underneath the car and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Underneath the car now, and normal areas that I would look for any sort of rubbing would be like the tire on the inner fender on either side. You can actually see where the lower control arm is slightly contacting. See that? You can see kind of where my light's shining, my hand's in the way now, where it is contacting the lower control arm, which is no good. The reason I showed you that last part, because you're probably gonna do the same thing I did, and you're gonna say, wait a second, it's hitting, something's not right, I'm hitting the new spacer on parts of the car, but it's because you're on jack stands. So what you need to do at this point, and there's different ways of doing this, I'll tell you how I did it in a second, but to get your car at full lock and figure out where you have issues of things rubbing, you've got to have the front suspension loaded because your tie rods are at an angle. So right now, two things are going on. One, your tie rods are at an angle, which means you're not actually getting, even if nothing was hitting, you're not actually getting full angle because it's like this instead of like this. And when it's like this, it's parallel more or less to the ground. It's a straight line and it can push further so you could actually get more angle out of the, the tires up front. So you have to have it at ride height to do this correctly. And the other thing too is because everything's drooping, you've got that contact that we just saw at the angle block. So what I did is I grabbed these ramps. Really a great way to do this would be with some like industrial Lazy Susans where you could like set the car on some kind of block of the front tires and cycle them. But what I did, it's not perfect, is basically turn it to where I think it was almost full lock, start to put weight on it, set the tires down on some ramps, and then turn it more as I drop it. And you'll see it goes actually a lot further. So what happens is when I got to full lock, I no longer had an issue with the contact that you saw with the arrow, but I did have issues with the tires starting to rub, and that's something they talk about in the instructions. So I plan on running spacers, and if you were very keen earlier, you would have actually saw I installed longer wheel studs up front for that reason specifically. But you've basically got to get these measurements next at ride height. And I went and I marked the inner tie rods where they go into the rack, and now I've got to pull everything back apart and install those rack limiters. So pay attention to some marks here. So this mark right here is where we were initially at full lock, meaning tires were about to rub or were rubbing on one side, and we were about to contact things. So that's as far as we could go. When I disconnect everything, this right here is how far the rack will actually travel. So we need to limit that much space. And with the spacers that I have, that is like 2.5. So we're just gonna grab 3, put them in. These will slide onto the rack. We'll reinstall this, tighten it up, and we should be good to go. Take our 3, and we're gonna slide these up on here. Get on there. Okay, you get the idea. I gotta put my phone down, but that's what we're gonna do. Check my marks. You can see those, they're all greasy now, but those 3 rack spacers are installed. You do wanna make sure that you've got the rack centered before you go and try and do an alignment. So go inside, turn your steering wheel each way to full lock, and then split the difference and center it, and that's where the rack is centered at. Once you've got everything centered, go ahead and install your outer tie rod. So you got your jam nut on there, run your jam nut down. This is obviously your adjuster, and then that is the washer stack up. Okay, so just take a look at that, hit pause, look at the instructions. The instructions will tell you how to do that. Ackerman plates, make sure they're set the same on both sides. And you're pretty much good to go unless you want to go ahead and do the brake lines too, which I'm probably going to try and show you here. Let me walk you through this install. I'm going to tell you a trick that is going to save you so much time. There's a little clip right here that just pops out. So you pop that out first, and then the nut on the other side is a 9/16. So you need to hold the one side of the stock line, break the 9/16 loose. And then over here, I want to say this is like a 10 millimeter, no, it's 12 on the stocker, and this is like a 13 or a 14. But anyways, that part is self-explanatory, but if you don't want to dump fluid everywhere and make brake bleeding a nightmare, here's the trick, and it's wild. What you do is grab a block of wood. I know this sounds crazy, just trust me. press the brake pedal in partially with the block of wood and wedge it on the seat. So you're pressing the brake partially in. For whatever reason, when you do that, fluid will not come out. You'll lose a little bit of fluid on this side, so whatever was in the caliper will drain out, but you won't dump your reservoir out. It is a lifesaver. Tons of extra room, and this is quite a bit longer than the stock brake line, which is awesome. Stop the video right about here because it's almost 20 minutes long, and this covers the installation top to bottom. Now I am gonna go ahead and put coilovers on this because it's just so soft with the stock suspension. So there are gonna be more videos where we're gonna go back through everything and test this thing and tweak it and all that stuff. I'll probably put spacers in the front. We can talk about angle, but that will wrap up the installation. I hope you found this useful, and get out there and drift something different.